Hi, it's Thursday and it's once again time for your free consult. And today is a really interesting topic once again, and it's about emergency contraception. I know all of you are going to want to listen in on this one, so let's get started. So first of all, I'd like us to be really clear about what emergency contraception is. It's an emergency. It's supposed to be used within an emergency. It's not for daily use. It's not for regular use. It's literally supposed to be used in an emergency situation. So what exactly is an emergency situation? One of the emergency situations is when you've had unprotected intercourse. Now this could either be consciously, or maybe you miscalculated your safe days, and so this is unprotected intercourse. It can also be used maybe if there was a case of sexual assault. That's an emergency and you need to protect yourself against pregnancy at that point. You could also use it if your regular contraception has failed. For example, if you realize that your IUCD came out, then that's an emergency contraception. Or perhaps maybe you had a different form of contraception that you used incorrectly, like maybe a condom that was used incorrectly. Then in that case, you would be considering an emergency and you'd want to use emergency contraception. So what are the main methods of emergency contraception? We have two main types. We have a pill or an IUD. And when we talk of the IUD, we're talking of the copper IUD. So let's start with the pill. We have different types of pills that can be used for emergency contraception. You could use one that has progesterone only, which is the levonorgestrel pill. And this is basically the morning after, the E-pill, the Plan B, you know all the names. And this is the regular one, the one that is available in most markets. So it has levonorgestrel or progesterone only. You could also have one that has both estrogen and progesterone, which is basically a combined oral contraceptive, or you could have one that has a chemical called ulipristal acetate. So there's three different types of pills that you can use in an emergency situation. Now, how do they work? They work by making your ovulation not happen. So you don't ovulate. And something that I really like to mention is that if you already have an ongoing pregnancy, an emergency pill is not going to make a difference to that. It can make it better and it can make it worse. All right. So basically, there's three kinds of pills that you can take and an IUD. So let's go back to the IUD. The IUD is the copper IUD, and it can be placed as emergency contraception within 90 hours of unprotected sexual intercourse. So it gives you a bit more time as opposed to the E-pill. The E-pill usually has to be taken within 24 hours, and it's usually 2 doses that have to be taken about 12 hours apart, and that's for the levonorgestrel one. Now for the IUD, you have a bit of leeway, especially in cases, for example, a sexual assault where you have to file a police case, you have to be examined, you may need a little bit more time. So 90 hours is more than enough to have a copper IUD placed in terms of emergency contraception. So the copper IUD is going to work by preventing implantation from happening. So ovulation may happen, even fertilization may happen. However, implantation is not going to happen because the IUD is going to occupy the place where implantation is supposed to happen. Now, unlike the E-pill where ovulation is not going to happen, with the IUD ovulation may happen, but implantation is not going to happen. So let's quickly talk about some of the adverse effects of emergency contraception. When we look at the E-pill, one of the adverse effects you can get is an irregular period. You may have irregular periods for quite some time after having an E-pill. Sometimes they can continue even up to 6 months. So if you took up an E-pill even 6 months ago, you may still be having irregular menstruation today. And the more E-pills you take, the more likely you are to get irregular menstruation, which is why they need to be taken in emergency situations only. Another adverse effect that you can get from the E-pill is more immediate. You can get a little bit of nausea, you can get a bit of vomiting. Now remember, if you vomit your E-pill, you have to take another one, and so that's a really important adverse effect to remember. With the IUD, one of the adverse effects you can get is abnormal bleeding, especially around the time of insertion and a few days after, and of course it can make your period a little bit irregular initially. Now, I want to bust a myth. People say that if you use E-pills too regularly, you're going to get infertility in the future. This is not true. Many studies have been done that show that E-pills do not have a long-term fertility effect. That doesn't mean you need to take them all the time. Remember, it's emergency. However, they cannot cause future infertility. Now, all that being said, emergency contraception is up to 95% effective against preventing pregnancy when taken correctly. All right, so there's a very high chance that if you use your emergency contraception correctly within the stipulated time, you are likely to prevent 95% of pregnancies, and I think that's a fairly high number. But when we talk about emergency contraception, specifically the e-pill, there's one thing that I do have to mention in terms of effectiveness. Women who have a BMI more than 30 are not as likely to have good contraception from an e-pill as women who have a lower BMI, because the higher BMI is, especially over 30, the lower the effectiveness of the e-pill. So please remember this, especially if you know your BMI is high. I really hope you've all learned about emergency contraception, everything about it. I hope I've busted enough myths. I hope you are more knowledgeable in this area, and thank you so much for watching, and see you next Thursday.